So my sermons on Rosh Hashanah, they tend to be a lot more outward looking. They're really about how to maneuver through the world. They're much more external. But my Yom Kippur ones tend to be much more introspective, much more internal. How to deal with our inner landscapes and our emotions. And I'm going to be honest, they're much harder to write. My Rosh Hashanah ones I can write fairly quickly. My Yom Kippur ones, I write a sentence and then I take a break and write a sentence. And with my Rosh Hashanah ones, I write them out, but I don't really look at them. This past Rosh Hashanah, I cut out probably half an hour worth, if you'd like to hear it later. Okay, you can put your hands down. But my Yom Kippur one, particularly today, I wrote out a lot more, and I'll probably be reading from it more just because it was a very emotional and challenging for me to write. But I thought it was important for you to hear. I thought it was important for me to hear. Ultimately, all my sermons are things I need to hear as well and to remind myself about. So my words today were originally inspired by a question that Rabbi B'nai Lappi asked. She asked, what do you do when your master story crashes? When the story you've lived your life by, you find out actually isn't true or is no longer true. And all the assumptions you've made about your life, all the assumptions you've made about the people in your life, what if that story just crashes? And so I expanded the question, and I've been thinking a lot about it, not just over the past year, but really over the last 4 or 5 years, is what is our real story? And what do we do when it conflicts with the story that we've been telling ourselves our whole life? It's a very challenging moment when you realize that the way you have been living is not true to who you are. So what is our real story? In many ways, storytelling is a core value of Judaism. When you think about from the Torah to the Talmud to the Haggadah to survivor testimonies, it's really telling stories is the way we shape our understanding of the world. It's how we make sense of things. Rabbi Maya Glasser said, the Jewish people love to share stories because it's the way we share memory. It's how we hand down our ideas to generations. But in every generation, we strive to share our tradition, even in the uncomfortable parts. In every generation, we pass down all the stories we hear so that we continue learning from the past and not just repeating it. This is why we study Torah. It's why we read the entire Torah out loud, even the cringy bits. Right? I have minister friends, and they get to pick the parts from the Bible they want to read, and they get to pick the parts from the Bible they don't want to read. And there are parts in the Torah which are uncomfortable. And you might find different parts very comforting, and the other person may find that part uncomfortable, and vice versa. But the weekly Torah reading forces us to confront all of it, to understand what the full story is. And our stories ultimately really are who we are. This is part of what makes dementia and Alzheimer's so devastating, is they don't remember the stories. Right? They're still there. They experience, people with dementia can experience joy, can experience sorrow. So much of them is intact in many ways, but so many of the stories aren't there. And that's what makes it so difficult. But we have to be honest with ourselves about our stories, and we have to be honest ourselves about our past. And we don't always do that, sometimes out of a sense of grief or a sense of loss or a sense of shame. It's not that we forget our past, but we look away from it. We sort of push it down and away. Devin Shackett, who grew up at Adat Shalom and is now a professor of acting in New York, she said, we make up stories so we do not have to live inside of the loss. Sometimes we ignore our own story and create a different story about ourselves because we want to avoid the feeling of loss, the feeling of grief that may come with the real story. But telling ourselves our real story, that I believe is the beginning of liberation and the beginning of freedom. And it's the next stage of our lives in a good and healthy way. This doesn't mean that everything was bad in our lives. Far from it. It is likely that there was really so much good in our lives and so much we should be grateful for. But there are parts of our lives that were difficult, and we may never have been able to face them, either because we were afraid of seeming ungrateful, or that we blamed ourselves, or that we told ourselves that it was nothing, it doesn't really matter. But we have to prepare ourselves to hear our story, at least from ourselves, and it's not easy. And you may not be ready now. At some point, maybe sharing with a trusted friend or a therapist would be very helpful. Brene Brown said, only share your story with the people who have earned it. Things happened to me when I was a young teen that should not have happened. And I have spent a large part of my life feeling shame, and I have only recently allowed myself to understand the story I told myself about these things were not true and were not my fault, and that I can feel strength and dignity. And Ruth is the only person on the planet who knows the whole story. Some people think they know the story. Ruth is the only one on the planet who knows the actual story. And when I finally allowed myself to feel that what happened to me wasn't my fault, that I was a kid, it became one of the most liberating things I had ever done. And I wish I had done so years ago, though to be honest, I wasn't ready. But it helped me take down walls I thought were protecting me, but in many ways were really separating me from others and from myself. And I think about the idea of the blowing of the shofar is that it's about taking down the walls that are barriers and leaving the walls that are protection. And I'm sharing this, and I'm not sharing the details of it, but I want you to know that rabbis go through stuff too, that we don't have it all solved, that I'm in it with you, and I want to help you find your way through it, because it is the path to liberation. Our tradition asks us to know ourselves first, really even before going on with our day. We say the prayer, Moda'ani or Moda'ani. I actually think there should be a version, Modim Ani, a more non-binary way of doing it. But it's just, I am thankful. But you can't be thankful until you know who the I is. Who is it who is being thankful? When you wake up in the morning, you say, I just don't feel like myself. What does that mean? It might be for the first time you actually do feel like yourself and you don't know what to do with it. So even the first thing we say is, who am I? When I think about the book of life, which we talk about so much over the high holidays, it's not about who will live or who will die when. It's really about, what is the story are you writing? And are you being honest about that story? And it's also a question of, when is it safe to face the truth of who you are and what your life has been? Is your story defined by your profession, your family, your history? Is it defined by failure? Is it defined by accomplishment or achievement? And Adam Gopnik talks about there's a very deep difference between accomplishment and achievement, that achievement is the completion of the task imposed from the outside, the reward often being a path to the next achievement. Accomplishment is the end point of an engulfing activity we've chosen, whose reward is the rush of fulfillment, the sense of happiness that rises from absorption in a thing outside ourselves. So many people, including young people in particular, are suffering because our society tells them the story they should live by is one of achievement. What college they should get into, what job they should have, how much they should make, where they should learn. Accomplishment is, what do you want to learn? What allows you growth? What allows you joy? And we spend all our time telling kids, it's not how you feel, it's what you have achieved. And then we're wondering about why the levels of anxiety in our society. You can accomplish so much, you can never achieve anything, because we're always waiting for the next thing to achieve. But if accomplishment is growth of who you are, that your story is, I can be the best of who I am, not who everyone is telling me to be, that is a path to liberation as well. What are the stories that you were told about how to be a man or a woman? Because most of us growing up were given very clear and precise definitions without any possibility of thinking differently or feeling differently. What stories were you not told about identity and figuring out your life? And how did that affect your choices in life, your self-image, your friendships, your career? And did those stories of who you were supposed to be reflect the story of who you wanted to be? And there are things that you can do, no matter how small, to feel that you are telling your own story about yourself. I will give you a technique that I use when I finally really want to confront myself. I sit at my computer and I set the font on the word processor to wingdings. Right? Wingdings are just symbols. And I just go at it. And I let it, because if I were to write it out in like a regular English thing, I would start doing spell checking and grammar. I am a terrible person and don't know anything. No, do I put an Oxford comma there? Or do I don't? And I just let it rip and then I hit select all and I erase it. I hope. But it is an exercise that allowed me to, in a sense, say out loud what I'd been kind of bottling up inside and didn't really want to confront. Parker Palmer said, before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. So what is the story that you tell about your childhood? Is it accurate? What's missing when you tell it? What story do you think your children and grandchildren or any other child in your life are telling themselves? What are the stories you gave them? Do they feel valued and loved no matter what? Or do they have to earn it from you? And how do you know? There's a wonderful radio program called The Moth, which talks about how do you tell a story. I think some of you have even been on The Moth at some point. And the founder of it, George Green, said, every good story hinges on a decision. Sometimes there'll be a lot of decisions, backtracks, double downs, veering offs, but always at the story's core will be one key decision. So think about for a moment, in your life, what was the single biggest decision that you made, or the single biggest decision that you should have made? And how did that affect the rest of your life? How did that become the center of your story? One of the challenges that people have is figuring out whose story do they get to tell. Now, I'll tell you, as a child of survivor, almost every time I told my story, it was actually my father's story. And I think anyone who's gone through some sort of family trauma or something gigantic happened in the lives of the people before us, our story isn't our story. We've been telling other people's stories, and at some point you realize this had nothing to do with you. You were telling about someone else. And it's hard. Again, I will tell you just as an example, as a child of survivor, I was invited to a Facebook group for children of survivors, and everything was about, oh, every single one of these people were amazing, and they were saintly, and they were incredible, and a lot of it is true, but what I put on it is, but wasn't it tough? Wasn't it hard saying, oh, as a teenager, oh, you don't want to take out the garbage? Well, when I was in the camps, it is losing every single time at rock, paper, scissors. And some people are difficult just because they're difficult. But if you don't feel you are allowed to say this is a challenge, so I put that on Facebook. Isn't it hard sometimes? And I got within 24 hours, 900 responses saying, oh my God, no one ever gave me permission to complain and say, this was difficult. And it's not even complaining. It's just acknowledging the truth of your feelings. And I think that this is something we have to give ourselves permission, because all of us suffer to some extent from generational trauma, whether it's national history, whether it's our family. It may have been generations before, but trauma is passed down genetically. You might be suffering from someone else's story generations past, and ask yourself, what's wrong with me? And there isn't anything wrong with you. There is a lot of suffering. People have been through a lot of things. And what Judaism does talk about is that our biology does not have to be our destiny. That we can face our story, we can face our trauma, we can face our loss, and say we're going to do the best we can. It's not pretending that it doesn't hurt, but it's saying that the hurt is only part of who we are. It's not all of who we are. And that even though we're going through tough things, there are moments of joy that are still possible. So often we're told, just deal with it. Were you ever told, oh, you're so sensitive, just deal with it, what's the big deal? Oh, okay, just me. At some point you probably heard, oh, what's the big deal? Or my favorite, other people are going through worse. And it might be true, but it has nothing to do with you. If someone is getting hit in the head 3 times a day, and you're getting hit in the head once a day, you wouldn't say, that guy gets it so much more. But we say that when it comes to emotional things. What's the big deal? Why aren't you more grateful? And it's not helpful. What helps is, I know you're hurting and I love you. And just leave it at that. In Jeremiah, it says, Yirpa'u et shever ami al nakala lemor shalom, shalom ve'ein shalom. That so many people just walk around saying everything's okay, everything's fine. But really, they're not fine. And Judaism really gives the permission to not be okay. It's okay to feel all your emotions, everything that you're going through. And we have a lot of tools for how we embrace our own story. Andrew Holichuk once said, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. That so much of how we view the entire world is not necessarily accurate, but is clouded by how we feel. So Yizkor, which we're going to be sharing soon, the word is remember. And what do you remember? And what do you really remember? It's not remembering just certain things. It's remembering your whole life. Because it's the way you remember things will have an impact on the story about yourself that you tell. And it has an impact on the way that you hear and understand the story of other people. During the Yizkor service, It's okay to remember hurts, even from someone who you also love. Humans are complex, and the person who loved you the most may have been the one who hurt you the most too. And both these things are true. And you don't have to say that everything was fine and that it never hurt. The way to remember is to say, this person's life mattered, but it was complicated, it was difficult. I'm going to do the best I can, but I also know I'm complicated and difficult. And to give yourself permission to feel all of it. The tzitzit that we wear on the corners of our talit, it says in the prayer, Uritem otam, to look at them, to really see what matters. The tzitzit are a symbol of our values, of what we put out in the world. And every day we ask ourselves, what is it that we're really seeing? Our prayers, the Shema, to just listen. Hear your own story that your inside has been trying to tell you. The Amida, the silent prayer, is about giving you words for your life. But it's really the silence between the words. This is the person I want to be. This is the person that I may never be. This is the person I was. And that you make peace with yourself. That's what Adat Shalom. Every single person has absolutely failed at something that they wanted to accomplish. You will never do everything that you thought you wanted to do. But that isn't failure, that's simply being human. It's trying to do the best you can under often what are the worst of circumstances. And lahit palel, the word to pray, really means to just go deep inside and say, this is who I am. This is what I have to offer to the world. And it's really, really hard. This is very difficult work. And this is why we do it together. This is really why we come together on the holidays. Every single person here is dealing with something really challenging. And I don't care how old you are. We always tell little kids, what do you have to worry about? You can just go and play. So you experienced no doubt or anxiety as children. You never really worried about what will happen to your family. You never worried about anything. Did anyone not have a worry at any point as a kid? So why do you think kids now don't have any? Every generation has something, and we come together to look at each other and say, you know, you're struggling, I'm struggling, let's do this together. And during the confessional, we talk in generalities. We don't go around the room sharing what our specific issues are. Right? That's private, and again, share it with those who earn to hear it. But it's a way of knowing that we are still loved, that we are still valued no matter what, and that we can share our story to ourselves without fear of collapsing inside of who we are. When I finally told myself that what happened to me when I was 12 and 13 wasn't my fault, and I told myself this at the age of, I'm going to be honest, 58. A year or two ago. I first thought lightning was going to hit me. And then I thought I was going to fall apart. And all the parts would not be able to be brought together. I would go full Humpty Dumpty. But when I said it, 45 years of shame fell off my shoulders. And I'm sharing that because you can do the same thing. People will still love you. You don't have to share all the details. But they already know something's wrong. They're waiting for you to know. And in that moment, is our freedom, and in that moment is our liberation. So I don't really talk about politics specifically, because how we vote and how we advocate is really based on our personal story and our desires and our fears. I'm just telling you what to do politically, first of all, it'd make half of you mad and the other half madder. It's not what I'm here for. My role is to give you the freedom to find your real story, and then you will make the right decisions based on that. I am here to help you with your map, not to give you directions to a specific place. Judaism is a map. We translate halakha as Jewish law, but it really means walking your own path in a good way. It is about finding your path with people who bring you joy, people who let you carry your memories without being weighed down or held back, with people who love you for your story. And there are a lot of paths. The Torah says, "L'lechet bidrachav," to walk in the paths of God. And you cannot follow the right path if you do not own who you really are and why you make the decisions that you do. So owning our stories in a deep and real way, with courage and compassion, will bring us to where we need to be. Good, Yanta.